And so, yet another edition in the hidden history of the African American fighting man, particularly in light of the fact that tomorrow is Veterans Day. You probably didn't know it, but you need to, ladies and gentlemen. If I were to ask you how many African American recruits, GIs, just how many African Americans serve in the United States military, how many would you think? I'm here to tell you that it's quite a few. We've got in total somewhere around 1.3 million active duty. Of those, 17.3% are African American. Does that surprise you? 225,529. These are the numbers going back to 2015. Those are the most recent numbers that we could get. Tell that to the neo-Nazis who are marching in Charlottesville, or anyone else who somehow or another think that the United States military is just composed of people who don't look like me. When it comes to active duty officers, there's 9.1% of the total officers, 230,000 officers, 9.1% are African American. Does that surprise you? 21,087 as of 2015. It becomes more than obvious when one looks at the total number of African Americans in these United States. The number of African Americans serving in the all-volunteer military is far higher than the ratio of African Americans in the American population. We're hovering somewhere around, actually it kind of went down to like 10, 11% in total. Some are even saying 8%. Officers on active duty, racial minority, enlisted members, and officers on active duty. The total is 400,000. 12% of those. 12%. 52,000 are, in fact, African Americans. Why am I giving you these numbers? I'm giving you these numbers, ladies and gentlemen, because you normally don't have these numbers. It is unfortunate that many of the war movies that you see in today's movie theaters do not include that African American warrior who has been fighting with this country since the beginning of this country. And I think that's the great divide. I think that's why you will have some neo-Nazis in Ocean Springs or anywhere else who can't grasp the concept of America being multicultural, and has been. Would not have existed had it not been for the brave warriors. And I don't mean just African Americans. I mean, you've got just a significant number of Native Americans, Latinos, Asian, significant numbers that were needed to make this country the United States. You know, folks, I'm very, very troubled right now. I tell you, I'm a chess player. I see a chessboard that is set up perfect for Vladimir Putin. And I'll share it with you. And all of this is based upon what I'm seeing unveil here as a result of this investigation. Our president right now is in Asia, now in Vietnam, actually, and it is suggested that he might meet with Vladimir Putin. And it's kind of ironic because it's Veterans Day tomorrow. Let me say this. I do feel that Donald John is a Manchurian president. I do. And that's not me wishing any angst on him. It's nothing personal. It's just I'm not hearing him respond against the Russian invasion and Vladimir Putin the way he should. The way he should as a president. Vladimir Putin has called out our generals. He's said that they are liars, and, the whole Facebook thing, and Donald John has said very little outside of encouraging them to do so. The man bragged about firing another American, Comey, to the Russians. Who does that? What kind of American does that to the top cop? Even if you don't like the guy, you don't sit in a room that you think is a private room with the Russians and brag about firing another American? This guy was talking like he was one of them, which is why, ladies and gentlemen, you need to just look. If you want to question Rip Daniels, just deal with the facts. Would you act like that? Does that even resemble any president you think would do that? So here's the chessboard. So we've got 3 aircraft carriers sitting out in the Sea of Japan, surrounding, for the most part, North Korea. Jong-un, who's now, as a result of loose lips sinking ships, accelerated his ambitions to get an intercontinental ballistic missile and get a nuclear warhead atop of it. Within the last 9 months, all of that has been accelerated. The man has fired more missiles during the Trump administration than any other administration. Now, look, folks, I'm not going to sit there and tell you it's because of Trump, but I can tell you I'm sure that the bellicose way in which Donald Trump has been talking with Jong-un and the threats, little rocket man, certainly would encourage me to get a bomb and get a bomb quickly. But that's neither here nor there. So you've got our 7th Fleet and then 2 other fighting groups, one out of the Persian Gulf and one that accompanies the president when he's going overseas. They're all there. One little tight area. That basically leaves, for the most part, 2.5, maybe 3 other fighting groups. In other words, aircraft carriers. One in and around the Pacific and the Atlantic. And then, look, folks, don't ask me how I know it, but I know it. One in and around either the South Pole or the North Pole. We can't confirm which. So you've got that, sadly. You've got America overextended, literally, in war. What, we're 11, 12 years now into Afghanistan? 10 years at least now back in Iraq. When I say overextended, I mean the economic toll that war that long has taken is why we have the debt, not to be confused with the deficit, we have now. And that's not just Donald Trump. That goes back to George W. And, of course, President Barack Obama, who I thought should have withdrawn our troops. But still, it is there. And Congress just refuses to make it part of the budget. It's now a separate budget. Add to the fact that we've got a so-called wartime president and had it since George W. This concept of the president can use force at anywhere and any time. It can be in Nigeria, Niger, anywhere at any time, Yemen. No authorization. The president now, and going back to George W. Bush, has a blank check to invade or encounter terror anywhere in the world or set off war. Of course, when President Barack Obama was there was this reluctance on the part of Congress and this questioning of whether he should do anything. And then if he did do something, it was like, oh, you can't, we don't trust you to do that. But we know how that works. So now you've got a president who, at his own whim, can give the word. Or he's allowed his generals to give the word from anywhere at any given time. And he's sitting in Vietnam, ironically, contemplating meeting with Vladimir Putin to get his marching orders. Now that combined with the other deck that's stacked here domestically. You see, the whole idea, in my view, is the ruination of this country from within. You guys are thinking that somehow or another there's an invasion by Russia, but that's not what this is about. You see, countries are controlled when you control their economy. We've got a president now who is throwing the American economy on the come line, meaning we're going to give all these tax cuts to the very, very wealthy in hopes that they're going to come back with businesses here. We tried that with George W. Bush, didn't work. But be that as it may, In the in hang on. The Soviet Union did the same thing with the help of one Ronald Reagan and how we infiltrated them. Hang on, where is it? Okay, here it is, right here. Going back to the days of Gorbachev and Glasnost.
80s?
Yes. So, 1985 was when the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic began to, well, dissipate. How and why, you ask? Well, the same thing. They were overextended there in Afghanistan. 10-year war, over 10,000 killed. And then there was an attack by us and others on the economy. Let's see, the whole Glasnost things allowed for more freedom of speech and so forth under Gorbachev. But it also did something else. It said, okay, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to try to back off on, get this government spending. We're going to allow private corporations to come in and handle things. Well, the oligarchs there began to simply profit take. That's what happened in Russia. And then the Russian government, you know, of course, it's still the Soviet Union, but the Russian government was the primary. The Russian government began to say, hey, whoa, wait a minute, we're going to put some burden on our states. In other words, the corporations here, the government's going to back off. We're going to privatize things and let the corporations take care of it. And the corporations began to not do that very, very well because they were more compelled to get profit as opposed to look out for people. I'm a corporation. That's what we're about now. I know that. So Gorbachev began to, he started to allow some private ownership and release some of the tight control of the government that the government had on the economy.
Just the Russian citizens?
Well, when you say just the Russian citizens, what do you mean?
Well, you said ownership. Ownership of what?
Well, you see, in a communist socialist country, the government basically ran everything. You know, you had the whole idea of private business, for the most part, was not exactly private unless you were a member of the Kremlin or the oligarchs.
Ah, okay.
It was private only in as much as you were part of the government. Government run does not mean, per se, official government run. It means our guys run this shoe factory or whatever it is.
But you got to be part of the club.
There you go. So Gorbachev was saying, okay, we'll just let you do it. We'll just let the free market take hold here in Russia. I'm a free market guy. Ordinarily it works. Except when it is controlled and monopolized. And that's what you had there, and they didn't do a good job of it. The people and the economy of the Soviet Union were used to, at the very least, someone looking out for their best interests, as opposed to private businesses saying, look, I tell you what we're going to do, we're going to fire everybody. And because we don't want to provide certain things like, let's say, pensions or insurance or the like. And let me just tell you, the Russians took to the streets. That combined with the fact that the economy began to tank because there was profit-taking among the oligarchs. You know, the thought here is that they were going to spend more money. We give it over, turn over it all to the private businesses, and the private businesses then will put more money and build more shops, and they did not do that. People just want a job. GDP, gross domestic product, there in Russia fell to an all-time low, and so the Russians began to say, well, look, we need to put more tax burden on the states. I want you to keep in mind what is happening right now with the tax bill for the Republicans. Get ready for this. And the tax burden becomes, well, okay, I'll tell you what, heretofore Russia was sending all this money out to the states, as in block grants. Let's give it. We're not going to do that anymore, and so now the states now have a heavier burden to tax individually in their states and take up the slack that government has been doing. Medicare, Medicaid. Got me? So the states begin to jump up and down and go, okay, the Russian states, well, we got to get out of here. The Baltic states started first. Estonia said, look, we're going to secede. We're going to break up the Soviet Union. Ladies and gentlemen, the rest of that is history. Now that was how the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic dissipated. It was overextension militarily, and then the collapse of the economy based upon the myth that the corporationists would do what is best for their people.
So that basically boils down to oligarchical greed.
Absolutely. So now, here we are with the pieces set up. Got an overextended military, ladies and gentlemen. And we've got a president and a Congress who have been duped into thinking, okay, I tell you what we're going to do. We're just going to cut taxes down to a pittance on those individuals, the top 1%, because they are the job creators. And they're going to bring all the jobs back. Liar, liar, pants on fire. What happens if they don't? You got a $1.5 trillion deficit that then goes to the debt that is well above $19 trillion now. But it is the deficit that brings you down the quickest. Let me explain to you what a deficit is, America. Just bear with me. And what's going to happen with your tax plan. I've seen both. Well, I've seen examples of both. I can't tell you I'm holding them in my hand. What you have here, let's say you make $20,000 for the year, right? You get your W-2, you get your W-2 in January or so, and it says you made $20,000. Well, currently you have deductions. You can say a deduction now would be automatic deduction for your children, which means, let's say they give you $5,000 deductions for the amount of children you have. What that means is your income, as far as the federal government is concerned, it's $5,000 less. So it was $20,000. They gave you a deduction for $5,000. That means your burden, you'll be taxed on $15,000. You got me?
Yeah.
Let's say you paid $2,000 that year in state taxes. Well, right now, you could deduct your state taxes. So you'll take $2,000 off the top, so that brings you down to $13,000. Are you following me?
Mm-hmm.
Of taxable income.
That you have to pay the tax
Right.
on.
You made 20, but the Fed allows you to deduct this, right?
From your taxable income.
From your taxable income. Good idea, right?
Sounds like it.
You can also deduct your mortgage. Deduct your mortgage interest. The interest on your house. Let's say you paid $5,000
In interest.
in interest. So now you're down to what, $8,000? $8,000 of taxable income. That's why deductions in doing the long form was so important. So now, theoretically, the federal government would only tax you on $8,000. Both plans of the Senate and the House gets rid of all those deductions, with the exception of maybe the child deduction. I have not read that yet, that they're getting rid of that. They want to eliminate all the deductions, which means although you paid for your children, although you paid for your the property taxes, although you paid for your mortgage and your interest, although those things were paid and they're paid, you're still going to be taxed on $20,000. You got me? Without those deductions, then your tax burden is based upon $20,000 as opposed to $8,000. Who do you think that would have the greatest effect on? Middle class America.
Middle class America.
Absolutely. Those of you who are out trying to buy a house and just trying to maintain your families, that's where the tax burden is going to be held. Those individuals who have the top 1%ers who are making out like fat rats, who would want to have just a basic 20% tax. 20%. 20% across the board. It's easy. Put it on one form. And don't be duped by this, but that chessboard is being set up again now. The whole idea of not having the revenue. You realize Congress just passed a budget. The budget says, here is what it's going to cost us to pay all of our bills. And this budget, states have to abide by this. This budget, we're not supposed to go over. They're already going over it. The budget is based upon the anticipated tax revenue received from corporations and from you, Ro. So you got a budget that says, okay, I know we're gonna get 20,000. We're gonna get let's say 10% of 20,000 from Ro.
Okay.
Right, that's $2,000, right? We know we're gonna get that. They just passed the budget, right? The budget says they're gonna get that. However, now we're gonna do a tax cut, which says, no, Ro, we're not gonna take your 2,000, which means you did a budget that was dependent on Ro's money.
But you didn't get.
But now you're doing a tax cut to say, no, we're not going to use Rose money, which means there is a deficit in your budget.
Okay, wait. Go back a step.
All right?
So when they say they're not going to use Rose money, that's because they cut the deduction?
They gave you, look, they cut your taxes, although they anticipated getting it when they did the budget.
Okay.
So they cut your taxes. Look, I like cut taxes, but I'm just giving you an example.
So I didn't have to pay as much.
You don't have to pay as much. They're anticipating that because they gave you a tax cut, Roe is going to take that money and spend it and create $3, $4, $5 more off of that. In other words, they did a budget knowing that there's going to be a deficit in the budget, which means you're not going to collect enough money to fulfill the budget or stay on budget.
And they know this.
They know this, which means you're going to have a budget deficit, which means you've got to come up with money from somewhere to pay the bills.
Yeah.
We've been doing it now for years in this country.
From loans from China, right?
The problem I have with this is now we're increasing that deficit. Rather than during the President Barack Obama's 8 years, he was lowering the deficit. The deficit has been lowered within the last 8 years, lower than it has ever been. And President Barack Obama took on an economy that had a huge deficit. I mean, the largest we've ever had in our country. But the deficit, look, don't take my word for it. Just simply look it up. Go to the GAO and look it up. As a result of a healthy economy and recovery, we were on track. I mean, look, this is not Donald John's economy by any stretch, ladies and gentlemen. I'll give him the confidence because he's promising pie in the sky to industrialists. Of course, today I see the industries went down because there are some questions about it. Confidence. I'll give him that confidence up. Anyone you're promising to do a tax cut, I'm up, I'm encouraged. But the economy and the basis for it right now is all President Barack Obama. And I don't mind telling you, President Barack Obama and partially a Republican-led Congress that was fiscally responsible. There was not overspending. There was good pacing. Interest rates stayed low. Gradually pulled us out of the hole that was created by tax cuts in the first place. Tax cuts and spending in the first place. Do you remember the earmarks and all that, tax cut and spend Republicans?
Yes.
That's the conservative concept, by the way. So, back to the chessboard. I'm predicting that somewhere between now and next year, it's going to become more than obvious that whatever tax cuts that took place, Senate wants to postpone the tax cuts until 2019. That still won't do. I'm going to submit to you, America, that we are going to be in an environment such that the federal government is going to be in such a shamble. They're going to cast off that shamble onto the states like Texas and California, who are carrying a lion's share of the tax burden. And let me just tell you, Texas still wants to secede. It is not inconceivable for me that how the dissolution of the United States happened can be very much like what happened in the Soviet Union, whereby you have member states who say, look, it might be better for the central government to just say, let them operate on their own. And maybe Jeff Davis had a point. And secession becomes the possibility. What Gorbachev wanted is not necessarily to invade. That whole conventional concept is just stupid. What he wants is a divided America, and he's on path to do it. The chessboard is set. There's blue against red, and there's conservative against liberal. Now there's conservative against ultra-conservative. Can't make this up. That combined with the largest base that Russia ever had now being built in the North Pole. Serious stuff. All right, looks like, as I suggested to you, the president's boy, his bodyguard, don't ask me how I know, folks. I've got very good friends. Very good friends in very high places. Keith Sheeler now has indicated much of what the dossier had suggested, and that was that there were prostitutes sent to Donald John's room. I've got the dossier right here. You want to know what was presented in the dossier by the MI6 agent for London.
Christopher Steele.
Yep. It says here, number 3, however, there were other aspects of Trump's engagement with the Russian authorities. One which had borne fruit for them was to exploit Trump's personal obsession and sexual perversions. Trump's perverted conduct in Moscow included hiring the presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, where he knew President and Mrs. Obama had stayed. And he wanted to defile the actual bed that Obama and his wife slept in by having a golden shower.
Really?
Now listen to me. Most of this dossier, except for the salacious part, has been confirmed that there were in fact meetings. I mean, you can't make it up. I mean, both the Republican-led committees have seen it and said as much. The salacious part is just, oh no, we just can't. Well, guess what now has been confirmed? There was Donald John at the Ritz-Carlton first. No.
So he was there.
He was at the Ritz-Carlton. And what has been confirmed by his bodyguard, that there were some prostitutes there.
Hookers was sent.
According to the reports, where is it? Sheeler said that he was contacted by an unknown Russian individual to asked Donald John if he wanted the company of 5 prostitutes. Sheeler says he took him up, and Donald John laughed about it and said, oh, no. And then Sheeler said he sat out in front of the door, he sent him away, and then sat out in front of the door 5 minutes, and then he left. Now, we're at a crossroads, and there's another piece of this piece that I'm about to tell you here on this chessboard that bothers me. So, you've got Sheeler, his bodyguard, long before he was president, saying that he was there, 2013, confirmed that they were at the Ritz-Carlton, confirmed that there were, in fact, prostitutes. And you've got Donald John saying this.
I am extremely careful. I'm surrounded by bodyguards. I'm surrounded by people. And I always tell them, anywhere, but I always tell them, if I'm leaving this country, be very careful. Because in your hotel rooms, and no matter where you go, you're going to probably have cameras. I'm not referring just to Russia, but I would certainly put them in that category. And number one, I hope you're going to be good anyway. But in those rooms, you have cameras in the strangest places. Cameras that are so small with modern technology, you can't see them and you won't know. You better be careful, or you'll be watching yourself on nightly television. I tell this to people all the time. I was in Russia years ago with the Miss Universe contest, which did very well. Moscow, the Moscow area, did very, very well. And I told many people, be careful, because you don't want to see yourself on television. Cameras all over the place. And again, not just Russia, all over. Does anyone really believe that story? I'm also very much of a germaphobe, by the way. Believe me.
Yeah, right, sure.
How stupid are the people of the country?
I have no relationship with Putin. I do have a relationship with him. I have no relationship with him. He has said nice things about me over the years. I remember years ago, he said something many years ago. He said very nice things about me, but I have no relationship with him. When I went to Russia with the Miss Universe pageant, he contacted me and was so nice. I have no relationship with Putin. I don't think I've ever met him. I never met him. I was in Russia. I was in Moscow recently, and I spoke indirectly and directly with President Putin, who could not have been nicer. I have never spoken to him on the phone, no.
Folks, here's the last part of that chess piece that bothers me. You see, the CIA and the NSA knows that Edward Snowden is somewhere with some battery chargers attached to his testicles, and Snowden has confirmed to the Russians how we did it and how we do it, and they're using the same thing on us, as opposed to the internet. But he's also exposed something else. He exposed how we gather information. Here is the piece that bothers me. What Mueller and what the head of the CIA is now have to decide is whether or not they exposed Donald John there in the Ritz-Carlton. Because there are tapes. I guarantee you. If they've got the bodyguard on the record saying, "Hey, look, guess what? Yeah, they were in fact prostitutes, and yeah, but Donald John said no." If the CIA shows him to be the liar, shows that they have the evidence, the information, the tapes, and so forth, then it will expose to the Russians just how thorough our espionage is. You got me? So the question comes, do we bust out Donald John, or do we allow the Russians to think that we don't know?
I got you.
You got me? So, and that is what the president, look, President Barack Obama's had to deal with this since he knew all of this. I guarantee you. It's like, well, do we even in some cases might even put some undercover agents at risk? Why? I tell you why. Because if in fact we confirmed, and actually it was great that this guy's he's now linked Donald John to the Ritz-Carlton. And by the way, the Ritz-Carlton is known. It is known for being under the guidance of the FSB, KGB, formerly. That piece is the piece I think Vladimir Putin wants. Once Vladimir Putin sees just how extensive our espionage is in his country, he's able to cap it off. And when he does that, then we are fighting a guy in the blind, and that becomes his control. We'll be back.
It's about that time to get away. Make your reservations, pack your bags.